doctors, welcome back to Pirates of Medicine. Today we are back with the path morphology based series, the third video in this series. Before we start, please subscribe to our channel, and if you find this video helpful, please share it with your friends. Without any further ado, let's begin. So we left at 41st question, and the 41st question is that a man died 8 days after the beginning of a disease. He was diagnosed with dysentery. At the autopsy, it was found out a thickened wall of the sigma and rectum, fibrinous membrane on the surface of the mucous membrane. Histologically, there is a deep necrosis of the mucous membrane with infiltration of the necrotic muscles with fibrin. What kind of colitis does correspond to these changes? So if you follow us on our Instagram, we posted this a while ago. Actually, when Shigella caused dysentery is happening in a person, there appear various changes in the local changes in the small intestine. So these local changes, these pathological changes, they follow a particular order. So first of all, we have catarrhal colitis, the first stage that develops. Catarrhal colitis is characterized by hyperemia and edema of the intestinal mucosa. So from the name catarrhal, you should understand that this involves excessive secretion of mucus. So obviously you can understand this is why this is characterized by hyperemia and edema of the intestinal mucosa. And they start appearing superficial necrosis containing areas, and the intestinal lumen starts to narrow. Then we have the second stage which develops after this, the fibrinous colitis or the diphtheric stage. When fibrinous colitis, the characteristic appearance that happens over here is coming or appearance of greenish brownish fibrin films. So these fibrin films, they accumulate over the mucosa of the intestine. This is characterized in fibrinous or diphtheric colitis. Then we have ulcerative colitis. Ulcerative colitis develops after this, and ulcerative colitis, from the name you can understand, is the appearance of ulcers in the intestine mucosa. Now these ulcers can have uneven boundaries, they can be of varying depths, and one important thing you should understand is that if these ulcers rupture, the whole the necrotic decaying matter, it can go outside the intestinal lumen and cause various problems. For example, paraproctitis, which means the purulent inflammation of the surrounding tissues of the rectum. It can cause peritonitis, which is inflammation of peritoneum. Then if these ulcers, they don't rupture and they are healed by the granulation or connective tissue coming inside them and filling the defects, then we have the healing stage of ulcers. In the question you can see that there is a lot of mention of fibrinous membrane, necrotic masses with fibrin. So from here you can understand that this is diphtheric stage of colitis. 42 question is that a woman suffering from dysfunctional metorrhagia has made a diagnostic abortion. Histologically, in the scrape, there were a lot of small stamped glands covered with multi-rod epithelium. The lumens of some glands were cystically extended. Choose the variant of general pathological process in endometrium. Now, from the question you can see that the woman is suffering from dysfunctional metorrhagia, which means that the woman's menses, the menstrual cycle has stopped. Now, after this, histologically it was seen that there are a lot of small stamped glands covered with multi-rod epithelium, and the lumens of these glands were cystically extended. Now, what is happening here is actually endometrial hyperplasia. Now, hyperplasia, you obviously know, is excessive growth. It's a general term of pathology, and if this excessive growth occurs in the endometrium, it is endometrial hyperplasia. Now, the cause of endometrial hyperplasia is generally excessive secretion of estrogen inside the in the female, which causes this excessive growth of the endometrial layer. Now, this endometrial hyperplasia can be of three types. The first is simple hyperplasia. Simple hyperplasia is characterized by, now these three types I'm talking about are the path morphological variants. Now, if we are talking about path morphology, there must be a difference in path morphology between these. The morphological picture will be different. So in simple hyperplasia, what we see is that first of all, it diffusely affects whole of the endometrium, and there is proliferation of the glands, there is mitosis and stratification of cells. Now the glands inside the endometrium, they grow in a regular tubular pattern, but they are dilated. There is cyst formation, This is called as glandular cystic hyperplasia of endometrium. But important is that there are no signs of cellular ertipism. Then we have complex hyperplasia, which is seen focally, not diffusely throughout whole of the endometrium. On the some small foci, we will see complex hyperplasia. If complex hyperplasia, the morphological picture is that there is proliferation of the epithelium, there are mitotic figures, but the gland here, they grow in an irregular pattern, and there are branched irregular contours, and there is little intervening stroma, lot of glandular tissue, very less stroma. And again, the cells don't show any ertipism. Then we have complex atypical hyperplasia, which again is seen only focally, and there is proliferation of the glandular epithelium, there are mitotic figures, the glands grow with branched irregular contours. Now all this up to now is similar to complex hyperplasia. What has changed? Change is that the cells now show cellular ertipism with pleomorphism and hyperchromatism. Pleomorphism means the cells of the gland, they have different shapes. Each cell is different from the another cell in shape. And hyperchromatism means that they are very highly chromatic. More in staining, they show more color. So these are the three types of hyperplasia. In the question, you can see that there were a lot of small stamped glands covered with multi-road epithelium, and the glands were cystically extended. So this is a characteristic of granular cystic or simple hyperplasia of endometrium. There is no irregular appearance is as seen in complex hyperplasia, no irregular contours, no irregular pattern. So obviously this is glandular cystic hyperplasia of endometrium. As you can see over here, first of all, we have general proliferative endometrium, and then here we have the simple hyperplasia. And in the simple hyperplasia, you can see these irregular glands. They have this variation in types, but there is abundant stroma. Correct? There is no nuclear ertipism. Cystic glands are present. And then we have the complex hyperplasia over here. They are closely packed, and the stroma is very less. Correct? There is stroma present in the simple hyperplasia. In complex, it is very less as compared to simple hyperplasia. In D complex hyperplasia, the glands are first of all irregular, tightly packed with very less stroma. The nucleus are large. You can't see the nucleus over here. But this is the histological picture of endometrial hyperplasia and its types. 43 is that the 46-year-old man complains of difficult nose breathing, Mikulicz cells, storage of epithelioid cells, plasmocytes, lymphocytes, hyaline balls are discovered in the biopsy material of the nose thickening. What is the diagnosis? If you remember the previous videos, we talked about specific granulomas, and one of those specific granulomas were rhinoscleroma granuloma. Now, rhinoscleroma and granuloma, they consist of connective tissue containing special cells called as Mikulicz cells and Russell bodies, plasma cells, lymphocytes, and neutrophils. Now, Mikulicz cells are important, and you can see over here they are characteristic, how they are different from other macrophages or how they are different from Russell bodies or Langhans cells is that they have this foamy cytoplasm. And this is characteristic of rhinoscleroma. So, and wherever you see Mikulicz cells mentioned, go for scleroma or rhinoscleroma. If rhino means it is occurring in the nose, the rhino part in Latin corresponds to nose. In the patient, you can see that there is difficult nose breathing, and the biopsy was taken from nose. So here we have rhinoscleroma or scleroma. 44th is that extensive thromboembolic infarction of the left cerebral hemisphere, large septic spleen, immunocomplex glomerulonephritis, ulcers on the edge of the aortic valves, covered with polypus thrombus with colonies of staphylococcus were revealed on autopsy of a young man who died in coma. What disease caused cerebral thromboemboli? Now, what is happening in this patient is there is a lot of morphological symptoms. You can see the spleen is septic. You can see glomerulonephritis happening. You can see that the aortic valves have ulcers on them, and these are the valves of the heart. They have these colonies of staphylococcus growing on them, and the death of the patient was due to a thromboemboli which traveled to the brain, causing infarction, leading to patient's coma. What is happening in this patient is, if you understand this morphological picture, and if you understand the disease that I'm going to talk about right now, you will never forget this picture again. So septic bacterial endocarditis is characterized by the septic lesion of the heart valves. What does that mean? It means that the heart valves are infected by a particular microorganisms, most commonly Staphylococcus albus and aureus, and this leads to polyp ulcerative endocarditis on the heart valves. So the plaques are formed on these heart valves, and these plaques, they can crumble, they are saturated with calcium, sclerosis can happen, and sometimes what happens is that these plaques or the thrombus growing on these valves, they get broken from the heart valves and they can travel to the different organs. If they travel to the lungs itself, it can cause pulmonary embolism, thromboembolism, which leads to death. If they travel to the brain, it caused thromboembolism, which of the cerebrum, which we saw in our patient. There are also other changes that developed with inside the a person with septic bacterial endocarditis. For example, spleen. There are these peripheral signs, but we need to understand that in our patient, all these signs were present, and the man died because a thromboemboli, it broke from the heart's valves, traveled to the brain, causing infarction, leading to patient's death. So all these morphological changes with the background of Staphylococcus colonies growing in the heart valves obviously corresponds to septic bacterial endocarditis. 45th question is that a patient ill with diabetes mellitus felt acute pain in his right foot. Objectively, the foot thumb is black, foot tissues are edematous, there are foci of epidermis, desquamation and stinking discharges. What clinico-pathological form of necrosis is it? So we are going to talk about some forms of necrosis. First of all, we have dry gangrene. Now, dry gangrene mostly develops in the distal part of the limb due to ischemia. If the blood supply to a limb is blocked, it leads to dry gangrene. Now, the important characteristic of dry gangrene is that there is a clear line of separation between the infected tissue and the healthy tissue. So you can clearly see a line, a demarcation from the healthy tissue and the infected tissue. And what are the more macroscopic changes? That the affected tissue is dry, shrunken and dark black in color, looks like a foot of a mummy. Microscopically, this is due to formation of black iron sulfide because of destruction of hemolyzed red blood cell. Understand yourself, if the blood supply of an organ, particularly the limbs, is blocked, the blood remaining in the limb will obviously contain some RBCs which will be destroyed, and these destroying RBCs release some pigments which the bacterial cells will act on, and the bacteria act on these RBCs, leading to formation of iron sulfide, which is black in color, turning the tissue black. Now the line of separation is characteristic. Then we have the moist or wet gangrene. Now wet gangrene mostly occurs in the tissues like mouth, cervix, the vulva, the bowel, the lung. And in wet gangrene, the tissue is affected by the saprogenic microorganisms like Bacillus perfringens, fusiformis, putrificans, and it becomes swollen and emits fetid smell. So there is edema of the gangrenous tissue, which is characteristic of wet gangrene. Another important thing to know is that unlike dry gangrene, the moist or wet gangrene does not have a clear border between the gangrenous and healthy tissues. So if you observe like a patient with gangrene, wet gangrene, then you will not be able to determine with the pen or with the like your finger that where the gangrenous tissue starts and where the healthy tissue ends. So another characteristic or the classic example of wet gangrene is diabetic foot. Diabetic foot is due to high sugar content in the necrotized tissue, which leads to growth of bacteria, and this is a complication of diabetes mellitus. Another kind of wet gangrene is noma, which is characteristic in children with measles. Now, this is the wet gangrene of the cheeks and uh, perineum in weak children in measles. Gas gangrene is a special form of wet gangrene which is caused by special microorganisms, Clostridium perfringens. Now, this organism, it gains entry into the open contaminated wounds, and which leads to the swollen, edematous, painful, and crepitant. Crepitant is important. Crepitant means that a gas is bubbling inside the organ. So the gas bubbles accumulate within the tissues, which is characteristic. The tissue becomes dark, black, and full swelling. This is gas gangrene for you. Bed sores is due to basically a patient lies in a particular position, which leads to excessive pressure on a tissue. So the tissue dies, the death of tissue under influence of pressure. And the most prominent area are the sacral areas, the spinous processes of the vertebra, the greater trochanter, the buttocks, and the heels. So these are the prominent areas where bed sores develop. Then you have sequestration, which is the area of dead tissue, which does not undergo autolysis, it does not sclerotize, and it is freely located in the living tissue. So a dead tissue, which is not the connective tissue does not come to clean it up. It is located inside a free living tissue, and it remains there, and this is called as sequestration. Sequestration is characteristically seen in osteomyelitis. In the healthy bone, various dead parts of the necrotic parts of the bone, they remain, which is called as sequestration. 46th is that a denaturation of, before we go to 46th, let's look at 45th. So obviously you can see that in 45th question, the foot is black, edematous. So if it is edematous, black, and in patient has a background of diabetes mellitus, what kind of necrosis is it? It's moist gangrene. So 46th is that a denaturation of proteins can be found in some substances. Specify the substances that is used for incomplete denaturation of hemoglobin. So basically, urea has a denaturation action. Urea belongs to a class of compounds known as chaotropic denaturants, which by basically what they do is they unravel the tertiary structure of proteins by destabilizing the internal non-covalent bond between the atoms. So this proteins, they are denatured by urea. There can be various processes. One of those methods is that there is direct interaction in which urea hydrogen bonds to polarize, in which urea breaks the hydrogen bonds to polarize area of charge, and basically urea is used for denaturation of hemoglobin. It can be used, and it is used in laboratories. So 47th question is that during surgery in a 17-year-old patient, it was revealed a tumor of 4.55 in 3 centimeter in size on the lower surface of the liver with subserous localization of dark red color. On the section, tumor has cavities with marked amount of blood. What is the preliminary diagnosis? The tumor over here is dark red in color, and there are these cavities with marked amounts of blood. We are going to talk about some benign mesenchymal tumors again, and this is benign mesenchymal tumor hemangioma. So hemangioma is simply the benign tumor of blood vessels. Can be 3 types. We have capillary hemangioma, which looks like a cyanotic node of capillaries branching from a narrow lumen. We have venous hemangioma, which consists of vascular bands with smooth muscles resembling veins. Then we have the cavity or cavernous hemangioma, which consists of cavity covered with endothelium and filled with blood surrounded by connective tissue stroma. So in the histological slide, you can see these cavities which have this blood, and this over here is cavernous or cavity hemangioma. And this is, you can see superficially. So you can see in the patient dark red color, cavities, cavernous hemangioma. 48. A sick man with high temperature and a lot of tiny wounds on the body has been admitted to the hospital. Lice have been found in the folds of clothing. What disease can be suspected in the patient? So question from microbiology actually. Louse-borne typhus, the epidemic typhus or axanthic typhus, is a vector-borne disease caused by Rickettsia prowazekii, and the vector of this disease or this Rickettsia is the body louse, which is called Pediculus humanus humanus. So symptoms are generalized myalgia, macular rash, you can see in this patient, high fevers and chill, lack of consciousness, severe headache. So epidemic typhus is the answer. 49th is that on autopsy it was revealed that the kidneys are enlarged, surface is large granular because of multiple cavities with smooth wall which are filled with clear fluid. What kidney disease does the patient have? So the kidneys are enlarged, the outer surface is large granular, and there are multiple cavities with smooth wall inside the kidney with clear fluid. So this is actually appearance of autosomal dominant polycystic renal disease. Polycystic renal disease is a hereditary disease called characterized by bilateral cystosis, development of cysts in kidney. Morphologically, obviously, in a bigger picture, you will see that the kidney is enlarged from outside. There is granules on the surface and it looks like grapes. The kidney tissue consists of many cysts of various sizes and shape, filled with serous fluid, colloid masses or semi-fluid content with brownish color. Microscopically, the cysts are covered with cubical flattened epithelium. The renal tissue between the cysts is atrophy. You can see in picture, this macroscopic picture. This is autosomal dominant polycystic renal disease. 50th question over here is that on autopsy it is revealed enlarged dense right lung tissue with fibrin layers on the pleura. Lung tissue is light green color on incision and muddy liquid exudates. What lung disease are these symptoms typical for? So if you remember our previous videos, we talked about Croup pneumonia, and I told you Croup pneumonia has other names as well, like lobar pneumonia, fibrinous pneumonia, parenchymatous pneumonia, and lung fever. So generally in your medical practice, they're not going to ask you to remember all these names, but in CROC, generally what happens is they're going to ask about Croup pneumonia, but they can in the option write lung fever or lobar pneumonia or fibrinous pneumonia because they mean the same thing. So in the question you can see that there are these green color incisions with muddy liquid exudates, which you remember, and fibrin layers on the pleura as well, which if you remember are stages of pathogenesis in lobar pneumonia. You will understand that this is due to red hepatization, congestion, and gray hepatization. So let's go to the next one. 51 is that on autopsy it is revealed soft arachnoid membrane of the upper parts of cerebral hemisphere is plethoric. It is of yellowish green color, soaked with purulent and fibrinous exudate. It looks like a cap. For what disease is it characteristic picture? Now here soaked means it is edematous. Now this is what you are going to experience in your CROC exam. There are going to be some errors due to difficulty in translation or whatsoever. Maybe it will be improved in the future, but we don't know. But you need to understand here that this is a characteristic picture of meningococcal meningitis. Now, meningococcal meningitis has three forms, morphological forms. First of all, nasopharyngitis, then purulent meningitis, and meningococcemia. Causative agent is obviously meningococcus. Now, in nasopharyngitis, you can obviously understand that the nasopharynx is involved. There is catarrhal inflammation of the mucous membrane of the nasal and the pharynx. And in meningococcal meningitis, which is important for us, the pia mater is severely plethoric, saturated with dull serous exudate. And during the second and third days, what happens is that the exudate, it becomes thicker, yellow, green, and purulent. And this accumulation of this exudate in the pia mater gives the appearance of a cap, yellow-green cap. So this is characteristic of meningococcal meningitis, and that is why our answer is meningococcal meningitis. And obviously you have meningococcemia, which is generalized infection of meningococcus in the blood. Now what are the things that can happen is For most important is that there is generalized damage of microcirculation, skin rash, changes in joints, the vascular membrane of eyes, adrenal glands, and kidneys. The rash in this case is hemorrhagic, star-like in shape, located mainly on the lower buttocks, lower extremities, eyelids and sclera, focal necrosis and hemorrhages, bilateral massive hemorrhages that develop in adrenal glands. This is called as Waterhouse-Friderichsen syndrome, important for meningococcemia. So I hope you understand. Let's go to the next one. 52 question is that on autopsy of a 58-year-old man, it is revealed that mitral valve is deformed, thickened and not totally closed. Microscopically, there are centers of collagen fibers which are eosinophilic. They have positive fibrin reaction. This is most likely. Now, before we go to the question, we need to understand the stromal vascular protein accumulation dystrophies. So, stromal vascular protein accumulation dystrophies are actually just simply dystrophies of a tissue due to accumulation of certain proteins inside the stroma and the vascular part of the tissue. So this stages you would be easier to understand if you understand them in a particular order, because they develop in a particular order. So first of all, we have mucoid swelling. What is mucoid swelling? Mucoid swelling is the dystrophy due to superficial reversible disorganization of connective tissue. You should know what the connective tissue is made of. It is made up of glycosaminoglycans, fibers, various proteins. So if the connective tissue is disorganized, it leads to depolymerization of glycosaminoglycans, which leads to excessive increase in hyaluronic acid. Now, this leads to increased vascular permeability because hyaluronic acid increases vascular permeability, and a lot of things come in: GAG, globulins, blood glycoprotein. They accumulate in the main substance, the stroma of the tissue, which is called as mucoid swelling. Characteristic of mucoid swelling is the metachromasia reaction. Now, what happens in this is that the change of color of histological stains in the place of mucoid swelling. What happens is that due to accumulation of substance inside the tissue, due to increased vascular permeability and disorganization of GAGs, a lot of acids accumulate inside the tissue, which change the color of histological change from the normal stain, which is called as metachromasia. Okay, then we have fibrinoid changes. Now, fibrinoid changes, they develop in two stages again. First, we have fibrinoid swelling. There is deep and irreversible connective tissue disorganization. Now, in fibrinoid swelling, what happens? That the vascular permeability increases more and fibrin comes into the tissue. Now, here fibrin is deposited, and again the tissue is edematous. The fibrinoid swelling is homogeneous due to destruction of collagen fibers, and the color of this in fibrinoid swelling is pink from eosin dye and yellow from picrofuchsin or Van Keusen stain. So after this swelling comes the stage of fibrinoid necrosis. The tissue is going to be necrotized. It is total destruction of the connective tissue. Microscopically, it looks like homogeneous structureless masses surrounded by macrophages and lymphocytes. Now, you should understand that this is occurring in steps. First of all, there was superficial reversible disorganization of connective tissue. Then the destruction became so severe that it became irreversible and it went deep. Fibrin proteins came into play. Then now it progressed to fibrinoid necrosis. Then we have hyalinosis. Now, hyalinosis is different. Hyalinosis is the formation of semi-transparent dense masses of hyaline which resemble hyaline cartilage in connective tissue. Now, hyalinosis, why it is semi-transparent? Basically, the refractive index of these hyaline tissues is similar to the connective tissue stroma in which they will accumulate, which gives the appearance of semi-transparency. And this refractive index thing is seen in hyaline cartilage, which is why the hyaline cartilage is named so. So this appearance of hyaline cartilage, where the hyaline cartilage shouldn't be, This is called as hyalinosis. Hyalinosis can be vascular, which means involves the arteries and small, like arterioles and small arteries, and their thickened walls with sharply narrowed or obturated humors. The hyal is, first of all, it is accumulated in the subendothelial areas, and then it destroys the elastic types, like it destroys the elastic plate and the middle membrane of the arterioles or the small artery. Now, on the basis of pathogenetic character, hyaline can be of three types. We have simple hyaline, which is made up of only plasma proteins. There can be some fibrin and some lipids. This is characteristically seen in hypertensive diseases, hypertension. So in hypertension, we have simple hyaline accumulation inside the arteries. In lipohyaline is seen in diabetes mellitus, and it contains lipids of plasma origin. So lipids are accumulated. The hyaline has lipids inside it. Then we have compound hyaline, which contains immunocomplexes, which is seen in rheumatic diseases and glomerulonephritis. So next is connective tissue hyalinosis, which develops in scars, adhesions in area of chronic inflammation. A great example of this is sugar icing spleen or glazed spleen. So if you remember, glazed spleen, the capsule of the spleen appears as if it is non-transparent and white, and there is a glazed icing as you see in a cake in a bakery. So this is characteristic example of connective tissue hyalinosis. Correct? So this is the appearance of glazed spleen. So I hope you understand why in our question there is mitral valve deformity. There are a lot of collagen fibers which are eosinophilic. They have positive fibrin reaction, and there is no necrosis. So this is fibrinoid swelling. There is nothing called as fibrinoid inflammation. It is specifically fibrinoid swelling, not fibrinoid necrosis, not mucoid swelling or hyalinosis. So important topic, I hope you understood. Let's go to the next question, 53. Chronic inflammation and transformation of the one-layered ciliated epithelium into multiple-layer flat epithelium was revealed in the thickened mucous membrane of the bronchus by uptake of the patient with smoke abuse. Which of the following processes occurred most likely? So, the background or the history of chronic smoking. What has it lead to histologically? One layer ciliated epithelium, squamous ciliated epithelium, has changed into multiple layer flat epithelium. Stratified squamous epithelium has formed now in the bronchus. What has happened over here? What has happened is metaplasia. Metaplasia is actually a pathology which occurs due to excessive stress on a particular tissue. So if there is a lot of stress, first of all, you have hyperplasia, you have hypertrophy. If the stress continues, you have metaplasia. Hyperplasia, hypertrophy, and metaplasia all are reversible. In this case, in the question, we had metaplasia of squamous ciliated epithelium to stratified flat epithelium. Another example of, for example, here you can see, due to cigarette smoke, the mucus secreting ciliated pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium that line the respiratory airways are changed to stratified squamous epithelium. Another classical example is Barrett's esophagus, in which basically due to chronic gastroesophageal reflux, what happens is that the normal squamous epithelium of the lower esophagus is replaced by the columnar epithelium. This is called as intestinal metaplasia because now the cells of the lower esophagus, they resemble the intestine. Gray's Anatomy calls it gastric hyperplasia, but Bailey's Love Surgery and Robinson's, they call it as intestinal metaplasia. So I hope you understand that metaplasia is basically changing of one cell into another due to reprogramming of the stem cells. This is basically done to protect that tissue from this stress. You can obviously understand in Barrett's esophagus what happens, that there is excessive regurgitation of acid into the esophagus, which is gastroesophageal reflux. Now, this acid can damage the cells in the esophagus. Now, to protect these cells, the cells inside the stem cells inside the esophagus, they reprogram themselves to change their structure into columnar form. So, if this stress is removed, theoretically, metaplasia should be removed. This is metaplasia. Now, generally, metaplasia, if the stress is not removed, it can go to dysplasia and can cause cancer if the stress is not removed. So, this is why metaplasia is dangerous, and this is why patients are advised not to chronically smoke. 54th question is that for a long time, 49-year-old woman was suffering from glomerulonephritis, which caused death. On autopsy, it was revealed that the kidney size was 7 into 3 into 2.5 centimeter. The weight is 65 grams. They are dense and small grained. Microscopically, fibrinogenous inflammation of the serous and the mucous capsule, dystrophic changes of the parenchymatous organs, brain edema. What complication can cause such changes of serous capsules and inner organs? So, chronic glomerulonephritis, this patient was suffering from. So, in the background of chronic glomerulitis, uremia can cause these changes. Uremia is nothing but the morphological changes, pathomorphological changes that occur due to accumulation of urea in the blood. So, if the excessive renal, if the urea is not removed from the tissues, from the body, it can accumulate and it leads to general intoxication of the body itself. Now, what are the symptoms of uremia? It can be sleeplessness, convulsions, hypothermia, urinal smell in the from the person, gray coloring of the skin. You can see in this patient. Now, morphologically, the picture is that the skin has grayish color due to urochrome accumulation. Powder-like crystals of urea and uric acid develop on the skin. Rash and hemorrhages in the skin are frequent. In the respiratory tract, uremic laryngitis, tracheitis, and pneumonia can occur. We can see this in the picture in the X-ray. This is uremic pneumonia. In the organ of digestive system, pharyngitis, gastritis, and enterocolitis can occur, which can be catarrhal fibrinous or fibrinohemorrhagic. Now, important to know is that in uremia, the serous membranes are involved in inflammation. So the pericardial membrane, the pleural membrane, the peritoneum itself, which are the serous membrane, they are involved in inflammation, which was seen in a patient. You can see the fibrinogenous inflammation of the serous and the mucous capsules. So in the background of glomerulonephritis, you can understand that this complication is uremia, which has caused these changes in the patient over here. 55th question is that a patient died under conditions of cardiovascular insufficiency. Autopsy results in post-infarction cardiosclerosis, myocardial hypertrophy, dilation of its cavities, especially of the right ventricle. Liver is enlarged, its surface is smooth. Incision revealed it was plethoric with dark red specks against the background of brownish tissue. Important, dark red specks against the background of brownish tissue. Histologically, plethora of central parts of lobules, peripheral parts around the portal tract contain hepatocytes in a state of adipose degeneration. How are these liver changes called? So, if you remember, we talked about changes, pathomorphological changes in chronic heart failure. Characteristic changes appearing in chronic heart failure is nutmeg liver. What is nutmeg liver? Basically, due to chronic congestion of the liver tissue, the hepatocytes, there appear these dark spots which give an appearance of nutmeg. This is a nutmeg. If you cut a nutmeg, you can see that this is the appearance of a nutmeg. You can obviously see that the same appearance is present in this nutmeg liver. So in the question, they describe nutmeg liver in this sentence: dark red specks means dots against the background of brownish tissue. These changes in the liver is called nutmeg liver. So 56th question is that a 59-year-old patient has signs of parenchymatous jaundice and portal hypertension. On histological exam, the puncture of the liver biopsy, it was revealed. What? Beam lobule structure is affected, part of hepatocytes has signs of fat dystrophy. The portal connective tissue septa with this formation of pseudolobules. Important. With periportal lympho macrophage infiltration, what is the most probable diagnosis? Now, pseudolobules, your brain should directly go to liver cirrhosis. So, liver cirrhosis is a chronic disease in which there is increased growth of hepatic failure due to cytocritical shrinkage and structural alteration of the organ tissue. So basically, there is excessive connective tissue growth due to liver, like some particular any disease like hepatitis, alcoholic hepatitis, viral hepatitis. It can lead to liver cirrhosis. So excessive stress on the liver leads to excessive growth of connective tissue, structural alteration of the organ tissue, leading to formation of these pseudolobules. So here let's understand more. So morphologically you can see dystrophy. It can be any type. It can be fatty dystrophy, hydropic dystrophy, or balloon dystrophy. Necrosis of the hepatocytes, regeneration, diffuse sclerosis, structural remodeling. Structural remodeling means the formation of pseudolobules. Now, connective tissue membrane in the sinusoids of pseudolobules, it capillarizes, which is called as capillarizes of pseudolobules. So these pseudolobules are characteristic for liver cirrhosis. This is why in a patient you can see all the changes: dystrophy, connective tissue septa, formation of pseudolobules, macrophagic infiltration, directly points to liver cirrhosis. Now, all these diseases, alcoholic hepatitis, chronic hepatosis, viral hepatitis, they can ultimately lead to liver cirrhosis. But pseudolobules, they are not present in these diseases because no structural remodeling has happened yet. 57 question is that on microscopic examination of a large neck gland of a 14-year-old girl, it was revealed destruction of a tissue, structure of the node, absence of lymphoid follicles, sclerotic and necrosis parts, cell construction of the node is polymorphous, lymphocytes, eosinophils, are typical cells of the large size with multiple lobule nuclei. Bersovsky-Sternberg cells are present and single nuclear cell of large size are present. What is the most likely diagnosis? No, a simple answer should be that Beresovsky-Sternberg cells are characteristic for lymphogranulomatosis. But here at Piles Medicine, we would like to go a little more deeper. So basically, lymphogranulomatosis or Hodgkin's lymphoma is a type of lymphoma in which cancer originates from a specific type of white blood cells called as lymphocytes. Now, Hodgkin's lymphoma or lymphogranulomatosis can be local or can be generalized. If only one group of lymph nodes in a body is involved, like cervical lymph nodes, mediastinal lymph nodes, retroperitoneal lymph nodes, only one group is involved, then this is called as local granulomatosis. These lymph nodes are enlarged, they are soft or elastic, they are juicy, they are pinkish gray, and then later they become soft, dry, and the border of these lymph nodes is lost. Then we have generalized lymphogranulomatosis. The growth of the tumor occurs not only on the primary focus, but many lymph nodes are involved. So as a rule, the spleen is always involved because spleen is a secondary lymphoid organ. And the pulp of the spleen is red with numerous white yellow foci of necrosis and sclerosis. This is called as diffuse waxy or porphyritic spleen. So this is seen in lymphogranulomatosis or Hodgkin's lymphoma. Now, how to differentiate this lymphoma from other types of non-Hodgkin lymphomas or like other tumors? So diagnostically, we have these significant cells in Hodgkin's lymphoma, like small Hodgkin cells, which are lymphoblasts, like large Hodgkin cells, which are mononuclear giant cells. We had this in patient. Reed-Sternberg cells or Swarovski-Sternberg cells. These are large cells with two nuclei looking like an owl's eye. You can see Reed-Sternberg cells, right? So Reed-Sternberg cells or Swarovski-Sternberg cells are seen in Hodgkin's lymphoma or lymphogranulomatosis. Then also we have lacunar cells, which are big cells with many nuclei and foamy cytoplasm. We also have these popcorn cells, which resemble popcorn, which express CD20 antigen. So in the question, you can see Brysovsky or Reed Sternberg cells. We have lymphogranulomatosis. 58 question is the female patient suffering from bronchial asthma had got a viral infection that provoked status asthmaticus with a fatal outcome. Histological exam of the lungs revealed spasm and edema of the bronchioles, apparent infiltration of the walls with lymphocyte, eosinophils, and other leukocytes, labrocyte or mast cell degranulation. What mechanism of hypersensitivity underlies the described alteration? So in the copy of the base we had, this question was repeated, so it should be a revision for you. We already discussed this. This is hypersensitivity type 1. A lot of eosinophils, degranulation of the mast cells, reagen reaction, type 1 hypersensitivity, atopy, anaphylaxis, whatever you want to call. 59 question is that on autopsy of a 40-year-old woman suffering from rheumatic arthritis, the enlarged solid spleen was revealed. On section, it's tissue of the mahogany color with enlarged follicles, which look like semi-transparent grayish whitish grains. What pathological process is it most likely? So this appearance of spleen is called as sago-spleen, and this sago-spleen is a type that occurs in amyloidosis. So if we are talking about amyloidosis, let's learn about amyloidosis. So amyloid is a pathology in which amyloid, an abnormal metabolic protein that normally should not be present in a body, accumulates in the interstitial tissue and the vascular walls. Now, what happens is that grossly the organs are enlarged and dense in amyloidosis. They are fragile and have a sebaceous appearance on lesion. The spleen amyloidosis, the spleen in amyloidosis is sago-like. Sago is a type of rice, Japanese rice, I think. So sago rice, sago spleen is characteristic for first stages of amyloidosis. So the first stages of the disease are characterized by perireticular amyloidosis of only lymphoid follicles present inside the sago spleen. Then appears sebaceous spleen, where the perireticular and the pericollagen amyloidosis occurs inside the white follicles and the red pulp. If you remember, the spleen has two parts, the white pulp and the red pulp. The white pulp has the lymphoid follicles, the red pulp has the RBCs and the splenic cords of Billroth. So, if first of all, the white pulp is involved, then the red pulp is also involved. So, if white pulp is involved, sago spleen. Both are involved, sebaceous spleen. Hope you understand. Now, what else you should remember is that if it occurs in kidney, the amyloid accumulates on the wall of the vessels, the capillary roofs, and the glomerular mesangium, the mesangial cells of the glomerulus, the basal membrane of the tubules. Now, the outcome is apparently kidney shrinking and due to connective tissue growth, because obviously connective tissue always come into play trying to repair the tissue, and apparently the kidney shrinks in chronic amyloidosis. Laboratory test for amyloidosis is important because on suspicion of amyloidosis, biopsy of the tissue is taken. It can be taken from rectum, kidney, tongue, lip, or abdominal fat. And the amyloid is stained reddish orange with Congo red stain. So the surrounding tissue are reddish brownish in color. You can see this. This orange staining is amyloid protein present in the tissue. So Congo red stains amyloid tissue reddish orange. Understood? Let's go to the last question for today. Local lymph nodules are enlarged near the infected wound. Increased amount of macrophages, lymphocytes, lymphatic follicles in the cortical layer, and large amount of plasma cells are revealed on the histological examination. What process in the lymphatic nodules represent these histological changes? So again, repeated question, you should remember this is antigen stimulation. Antigen presenting cells, the dendritic cells, come inside the lymph nodes. They present this antigen to the T lymphocytes. Now the T lymphocytes, they start to differentiate into their corresponding T helper or T killer or whatever. The T helper, they stimulate synthesis of B cells, differentiation of B cells into plasma cells, And this process of these things occurring due to presentation of antigen is called as antigen stimulation. You can see we had this slide in the previous video as well. Wait, before you go, check out the WhatsApp link in the description. Basically, we are trying to make a community of students who are going to give Croc 1. So these students in this WhatsApp group, they help each other with solving their doubts. We send a daily Croc 1 quiz question in the group, and also all our links to our videos are shared in this group as well. So subscribe to the channel, join our WhatsApp group, check out other social media channels of Pirates of Medicine. And yeah, this has been good. See you in the next one.